All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know it's getting tired, but I'll try to be quick. Yeah, so we're looking at supply chain risk and the performance of freight forwarders in South Africa. This is a beautiful campus in Johannesburg. So this is how the buildings look like. You are all welcome whenever you have time. So that is the huge map of Africa with the Trans-African highways. Now, many of these routes are generally used to ship goods out of the continent, but also get goods into the continent through imports. And one thing we need to know is that whenever we're talking about international trade, freight forwarders play a key role in making sure that the trade takes place as expected. So the study is based on the southern part of that map. That is the tip of that map, which is where South Africa is. So generally, we know that global trade does expose firms to high supply chain risks. Of course, due to the long lead times, different trade policies, and also trade wars, as we have seen in the recent past. You could be expecting goods, but then the trade war just comes up, and then you don't get the goods as expected. So we find that freight forwarders, being intermediaries, they face much of this risk, or they try to mitigate this risk on behalf of their clients, who are generally maybe sometimes manufacturers or general traders. So the big question we ask ourselves is, do some of these risks actually affect the performance of freight forwarders? So that is the big question that we ask ourselves. Or some of these freight forwarders have a way of mitigating this kind of international risks. So we find out that many of the prior studies have broadly examined supply chain risks in various sectors. And many of these studies are usually have not incorporated African context. And also we find that they limit the integration of macro risks such as exchange rate. So this study, we're trying to make sure that we integrate supplier reliability and these macro factors. So the freight forwarding industry in South Africa coordinates about 80% of South Africa's trade, and it is dominated by the few huge international freight forwarders that we all know, the likes of DHL, DSV, and Kunanago. So those are the ones that are actually running the industry in South Africa. Then the key challenges we find is the operational issues, which include logistics, security concerns, and also regulatory compliance. So what does it look like in terms of market value? We find that the freight forwarding industry is estimated about $14.7 billion and expected to reach about $20 billion by 2030. So it is quite a huge industry. So what methodology did we use? Just a cross-sectional survey where we collected data from 156 South African freight forwarders. We analyzed the data using descriptive statistics. So it's kind of model-free results that we're presenting here, not much of modeling. So the results indicate that the large firms, many of the respondents were the large firms, about 21.8%. So based on the number of employees that are in those firms. Then the results indicate we conducted a principal component analysis to do factor analysis. And we found out that the major supply chain risks that you can face is in South Africa is generally the supplier reliability issues came out on top, then currency fluctuations and the political instability are some of the risks that you can face. So supplier reliability risks, and that brings us to another question. How do farms mitigate this kind of risks with the globalization? Are farms likely to change their market sources from the global sources to localized purchasing or local sources? So that is one of the key things that we're seeing, especially if you talk of countries like in the US, they're looking more inward now than shipping goods from global markets. Now, what should be happening in other countries is almost the same thing, because these challenges are all over. But it will also depend on industry. Some industries, especially African states, cannot be able to be self-sufficient, so they have to import some of the goods. So they have to look at ways of minimizing the effect. So another thing is currency fluctuations. We find that many of the African countries, well, American countries, the US can be able to print currency and manage their fiscal stuff. African countries cannot be able to do that. So they face currency fluctuations, and this affects their capability to participate in international trade. And that is also a big challenge to this country. So generally, well, in terms of a relationship, we established that, so we measured performance in two variables, that is operational performance and financial performance. So we found that financial performance is positively correlated with currency fluctuation and the political instability. In other words, all the factors that we're talking about, currency fluctuation and political instability, were directly correlated to financial performance. Then how do we conclude? We say that top supply chain risk factors for freight forwarders include supplier reliability issues, currency fluctuations, and the political instability. So in other words, we find that while there are many other factors that could be affecting freight forwarders in terms of supply chain risks, these are the top ones that they have to mitigate all the time. Then we also established that currency fluctuations and the political instability were positively correlated to financial performance of freight forwarders. Now, we all know that whenever you're doing international business, political instability and currency fluctuations are top. So if the currency is highly volatile, there's a very high possibility that it's going to be a risk into that particular business. But we find it very prominent in developing countries than in developed countries. Then we find that the market value of freight forwarders continues to grow, implying that they are applying some risk mitigation strategies. So in other words, what we are saying is, where we are seeing that they have these risk factors, where we see political instability and the currency fluctuations being key risks, what we are finding out in the literature is that market value of freight forwarders is actually is increasing. So what could be the reason for that? If you remember from the literature, many of the players here are the big conglomerates of freight forwarders. So meaning that these firms, maybe they make use of the stable currencies, they don't make use of the South African rand, or sometimes they do the futures on when they're charging their clients. So they try as much as possible to mitigate those risks. We also find that this particular study was grounded on the resource dependence theory, and we extend the application of the resource dependence theory to supply chain risk research by identifying the dependence on global suppliers and other external resources can pose huge risks to farms. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.